In 2021, Harvard researchers completed a fascinating study of high-achieving adults over 40. They tracked 3,000 successful executives, entrepreneurs, doctors, and attorneys throughout an entire year, carefully monitoring their decision-making patterns. What emerged was a peculiar and deeply uncomfortable finding that surprised even the researchers themselves. The more successful these people became, the less likely they actually were to feel ready for the next significant step in their lives. 78% of these accomplished professionals reported the same persistent sensation during crucial moments of decision-making. They all felt they should wait just a bit longer before making their move into something new and potentially transformative. They told themselves they needed one more piece of information, one more certification, one more conversation with someone who had already succeeded in similar circumstances. That feeling of unreadiness persisted like an unwanted guest that simply refused to leave. Here is where the research took its most revealing and counterintuitive turn. And this is what truly shocked the researchers conducting this study. The people who reported feeling completely ready, who experienced that crystalline certainty, that perfect alignment of circumstances and confidence, almost never took any action at all. They talked about their dreams endlessly. They planned meticulously. They gathered information with obsessive intensity. But when it came time to actually step forward into uncertainty, these people remained paralyzed, waiting for a feeling that would never arrive. 20 years into her career at Vogue magazine, a woman named Vera Wang attended her own wedding and found herself unable to locate a single wedding dress that truly resonated with her aesthetic sensibilities and design vision. She immediately recognized a gap in the marketplace that felt obvious and urgent. She understood fashion better than almost anyone alive in her professional circles. Her father, who knew her brilliantly and without reservation, encouraged her to pursue this opportunity immediately. But Vera told him no, explaining that she simply wasn't ready for such a massive change in direction. She didn't have formal training in bridal design specifically. She didn't understand manufacturing processes or supply chain logistics deeply enough. She didn't possess the necessary connections within the bridal industry that she felt were so essential to success. By the time she turned 40 years old, Vera Wang had decided to ignore that powerful feeling of unreadiness and take action anyway, despite her persistent doubts. She opened her bridal company without waiting for permission from her own nervous system and doubt-producing brain. Today, her name appears on wedding dresses worn by thousands of women every single year, and her brand now commands a value somewhere in the hundreds of millions of dollars. But here is what haunts this story and makes it truly instructive for understanding how we sabotage ourselves at the worst possible moments. Vera did not become significantly more ready between 39 and 40 years of age. Nothing fundamental changed except her willingness to proceed despite the internal resistance. She simply chose to act without the permission she had been waiting for from her own mind. Here is what modern neuroscience has discovered through rigorous research. And this finding is genuinely revolutionary and challenges everything most people believe about motivation. The feeling of readiness is not actually a signal that you are sufficiently prepared for what lies ahead. It is not evidence that you have accumulated enough knowledge or skill. It is actually a neurological lie, a trick that your ancient brain plays on you specifically to keep you small and safe and comfortable. Your brain evolved not to help you build businesses or launch creative projects or change careers completely. Your brain evolved to help you survive in a world where one wrong move meant immediate death and extinction. That ancient survival system is still running inside your mind right now, still vigilant and protective, still whispering softly to you that you should wait just a little bit longer. In the pages ahead, You are going to discover exactly why this happens to successful, intelligent, capable people like yourself. You will meet the specific parts of your brain that are responsible for this paralyzing sensation. You will understand the exact biochemistry of hesitation and how it creates the wall of doubt that keeps your motivation trapped behind layers of fear and uncertainty. But most importantly, you will learn how to override this ancient system and act anyway, despite the feeling that you are not yet ready. Chapter 1. The first lie about motivation. Motivation does not come first. And this is the foundational lie that has kept millions of intelligent and capable people paralyzed in a state of perpetual waiting. They convince themselves that someday, when they finally feel that spark of genuine enthusiasm, they will take action, but that day never arrives. The strange part is that most people already know this truth somewhere deep inside themselves. Yet they continue to wait anyway. They continue to believe that motivation is something that happens to you, rather than something you create through the simple act of beginning. James Clear was 20 years old when he decided he wanted to write. Though he did not feel particularly inspired to write anything at all. He did not wake up filled with burning passion for the written word or any sense that he had something extraordinary to share with the world. What he felt instead was something far more mundane and ordinary. A vague sense that writing might be useful, that it could help him think more clearly, that it might eventually lead somewhere interesting if he persisted. He felt no enthusiasm whatsoever about the prospect of sitting down and putting words on a page. But here is the critical part of this story, the part that neuroscience has now confirmed through decades of research on habit formation and behavioral change. Clear did not wait to feel motivated before beginning his writing practice. He simply decided to write 250 words every single day, regardless of whether inspiration showed up or not. Some mornings, he felt nothing but resistance and fatigue. Some mornings, his ideas felt tired and repetitive and utterly worthless. Some mornings, he genuinely questioned whether he should even bother opening his laptop at all. But he wrote anyway. What happened next is what your own brain is capable of producing. Though most people never discover this because they quit before the mechanism has a chance to activate completely. After approximately 3 weeks of writing those 250 words every day without exception, something shifted inside his neurobiology in a fundamental way. His brain began to associate the act of writing with something positive and rewarding. Dopamine started flowing when he sat down at his desk each morning. The resistance lessened considerably. The words came easier than they had before. The motivation that he had been waiting for at the beginning suddenly arrived. But it arrived only after he had already begun taking action despite its absence. This is the fundamental reversal that changes everything about how you approach motivation and your dreams. It changes how you approach the specific project or decision or life change that you have been postponing while waiting to feel more ready. The conventional wisdom teaches that motivation comes first, that you must feel inspired before you can take action. But the neuroscience of motivation reveals something entirely different and infinitely more liberating than what you were taught. Your brain is a prediction machine that uses patterns from your past to predict what will happen in your future. It generates emotions, including motivation, based on those predictions about whether an action is safe or dangerous. When you have never done something before, your brain has no data about what will happen if you try. So it generates caution instead. It generates doubt and hesitation. It generates that persistent feeling that you should wait a bit longer. Gather more information. Make sure you are genuinely ready before you risk taking action on something unfamiliar. But here is the miraculous part that most people never discover in their lifetimes. Your brain does not actually need you to feel motivated before you begin anything new. It only needs you to begin, regardless of how you feel in that moment. The moment you take even the smallest action in the direction of your goal, the moment you write those words, make that phone call, send that email, have that conversation, your brain processes that action as data. It updates its prediction about whether this activity is safe. It registers the outcome of what happened, and it begins adjusting the neurochemical cocktail it creates in response to this specific activity. This process is called neuroplasticity, and it is one of the most powerful forces available to any human being who understands how to work with it rather than against it. Your brain literally rewires itself based on the actions you take and repeat over time. The pathways that you activate through repeated behavior become stronger and more efficient. The neurotransmitters that are released during and after those actions create associations that influence your future behavior and emotional state. Motivation is not the spark that ignites the fire. Motivation is the fire that burns as a result of striking the match. Think about this in the context of your own life right now and what you have been avoiding. There is something you want to do, something you have been thinking about for weeks or months or maybe even years. There is some project or goal or decision or life change that occupies your thoughts regularly. You have imagined how good it will feel when you finally begin. You have fantasized about the results and what your life will be like. You have planned extensively in your mind what you will do and how you will do it. But you have not actually started because you do not feel ready. What if the problem is not that you are waiting for the wrong signal, but that you are waiting for a signal that will only arrive after you have already started? What if the readiness you are waiting for is actually created by the action itself, rather than preceding it? This is the insight that changes everything about how you approach your goals. This is the discovery that transforms procrastinators into people who consistently get things done. This is the mechanism that Clear understood intuitively when he decided to write 250 words every day, regardless of his emotional state. The technique that activates this neurological mechanism is deceptively simple, almost offensively simple when you first hear it described to you. Most people dismiss it as too easy, as though something this profound must require something more complex and sophisticated and difficult. But the simplicity is actually the point, because your brain is more likely to follow through on something manageable than on something that feels overwhelming. Your brain is more likely to generate motivation in response to small and concrete actions than in response to enormous and abstract goals. This is what neuroscientists call the -100 meters technique, though it goes by many other names depending on who is teaching it to you. The basic principle is this: whatever goal you have been imagining, whatever project you have been planning, imagine it is 100 meters away from where you are now. Then imagine taking a step that is only 1 meter in that direction, not the whole journey ahead of you, not even a significant portion of the journey. Just 1 meter, just one small and manageable action that moves you infinitesimally closer to where you want to be. For James Clear, 1 meter was 250 words, not a finished article or a polished essay, or even a complete thought necessarily, just 250 words. For someone who wants to start a business, 1 meter might be spending 15 minutes researching what a business license costs in their state. For someone who wants to change careers, 1 meter might be scheduling a single conversation with someone who already works in that field. For someone who wants to improve their relationship, 1 meter might be having one honest conversation about a single issue. The reason this technique works so reliably is because it tricks your brain in the most beneficial way possible. And neuroscience has proven why this happens. Your survival brain, the ancient part of your nervous system that evolved to keep you alive in a world of predators. experiences the goal of start a business or change my career as a massive threat to your safety. It sees the scale and complexity of what you are proposing, and it generates fear and resistance. It generates every reason why waiting a bit longer might be the safer and wiser choice for your survival. But your survival brain does not perceive research business licenses for 15 minutes as a genuine threat. It perceives this as manageable and doable. It perceives this as something you can actually do without exposing yourself to catastrophic danger or failure. So it lets you do it without generating overwhelming resistance. You take that small action. Your brain registers the outcome. You survived. Nothing terrible happened. And in fact, you learned something useful. Suddenly, the motivation that was completely absent before you started has begun to materialize. This is not magic or wishful thinking. This is neurochemistry and how your brain actually functions. This is your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to help you learn and adapt and grow over time. But it can only do this work if you give it the data it needs, which means you have to take action first. You have to begin, even when you do not feel ready. You have to start, even when you do not feel motivated. You have to take that 1 meter and then trust that the motivation will follow. Here is your practice for today. And I want to emphasize that this is not optional if you genuinely want something to change in your life and circumstances. This is the moment where the gap between knowing and doing opens up. And most people fall through it. Most people read something like this, feel inspired for a moment, think to themselves that they will definitely start tomorrow when they have more time. Then they close the book and they do nothing at all. But you are going to be different. And you are going to identify one specific action that represents 1 meter toward your goal. This does not need to be a big or complicated action that overwhelms you. It needs to be something that will take you 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes at the absolute most. It needs to be something that you can do today, before you finish listening to this chapter. It needs to be something that feels so small and manageable that your survival brain cannot generate an argument against it. If your goal is to start a business, your 1 meter might be opening a blank document and writing down 3 ideas about what kind of business you would like to create. If your goal is to improve your health, your 1 meter might be looking up 1 recipe for something healthy that you would actually enjoy eating. If your goal is to write a book, your 1 meter might be writing 3 sentences about what that book would be about. If your goal is to have a difficult conversation, your 1 meter might be writing down exactly what you want to say. The point is not to accomplish something massive on your first try at this technique. The point is to move 1 meter in the direction you want to go. And that is genuinely all you need to do today. That single small action, that tiny shift in your behavior, will trigger a cascade of neurological changes that will begin to shift your emotional state. It will begin to generate the motivation that you thought you needed to wait for initially. It will provide your brain with data that suggests this goal is actually possible, that you are capable, that you do not need to be afraid. Chapter 2. The Myth of Resolving All Doubts. There is a belief that has been drilled into the minds of successful adults throughout their entire lives. A belief so pervasive and so deeply embedded in our culture that most people never question it at all. This belief states that doubt is a signal to stop, that uncertainty means you should pause and reconsider, that the presence of unresolved questions is evidence that you are not ready to proceed. This belief has paralyzed more people than any single thing in modern psychology. And yet, almost nobody talks about it openly or acknowledges its devastating impact on human potential. Seth Godin, one of the most prolific writers and entrepreneurs of this generation, decided in the late 1990s that he wanted to start a blog. At that time, nobody really knew what a blog was. There was no business model for it. There was no clear path to success. There were no case studies showing that this idea would work out. Seth had approximately 10,000 questions about whether this made sense, whether it was a waste of time, whether he should be doing something more practical and conventional instead. But here is what Seth did that separates people who achieve their goals from people who remain stuck in perpetual deliberation. He did not wait until he had resolved all of those doubts. He did not research until the uncertainty disappeared. He did not create a perfect plan that answered every possible objection before he began. He simply started writing and published his thoughts every single day, despite the fact that he had no idea whether anyone would read it or care about what he had to say. What happened over the years that followed was that Seth's blog became one of the most influential voices in business and marketing globally. He built a massive audience. He proved that this format worked. He demonstrated that the doubt he felt at the beginning was not a signal that he should stop. It was a signal that he was doing something new and unfamiliar, something that his brain had never encountered before. The doubt was not evidence of failure to come. The doubt was simply evidence of newness. This is one of the most important distinctions that you need to make in your own life right now if you want to move forward with anything significant. Your brain creates what neuroscientists call a fear catalog whenever you contemplate doing something that feels unfamiliar or risky. Your brain generates a comprehensive list of all the things that could potentially go wrong. It creates mental simulations of worst-case scenarios. It identifies every possible obstacle and every possible way that your plan could fail spectacularly. Most people interpret this fear catalog as evidence that their plan is flawed, or that they are not ready, or that they should wait and gather more information. But neuroscience tells us something very different about what is actually happening in that moment. Your brain is not providing you with useful information about the future. Your brain is providing you with evidence of its own unfamiliarity with this territory. The more doubt your brain generates, the more new this thing is to you. The more uncertainty you feel, the more clearly this indicates that you are about to do something that your nervous system has never had to do before. Think about a time in your past when you did something that felt frightening before you started, but that turned out to be completely fine. Maybe you changed jobs and you were terrified about whether you could actually do the work. But you managed. Maybe you ended a relationship that felt scary to end, but you survived. Maybe you had a difficult conversation with someone you cared about, and you were full of doubt beforehand. But the conversation actually helped things improve. In all of those cases, your doubt beforehand was not predictive of what actually happened. Your brain cannot accurately predict the future, and this is a fact that most people never truly internalize. Your brain can only access data from your past, and it uses that data to create predictions about your future. But when you are about to do something completely new, something that you have never done before, your brain has no relevant data to work with. So it defaults to caution. It defaults to generating doubt and fear and worst-case scenarios. It does this not because the future will actually be terrible, but because your brain literally has no way to know what will happen. This is where most people make the critical error that keeps them stuck for years or decades. They treat the doubt that their brain generates as if it is useful information about the future. They treat their uncertainty as evidence that they should wait. They treat the fear catalog as a legitimate reason to delay taking action. But this is a fundamental misunderstanding of what doubt actually means in the context of attempting something new. Here is the key insight that changes everything. Doubt about doing something new is completely normal and expected and universal among human beings. Every single person who has ever achieved anything significant in their life felt doubt beforehand. Every entrepreneur who ever built a successful company felt uncertainty about whether their idea would work. Every person who ever changed their life in a meaningful way felt skepticism and fear at the beginning. The presence of doubt is not a sign that you are different or unprepared or incapable. The presence of doubt is simply a sign that you are human and that you are about to do something new. But there is an important distinction that you need to make. And this distinction will save you years of wasted time and regret. There is a difference between productive doubt and destructive doubt. There is a difference between the kind of hesitation that is genuinely warning you about real danger and the kind of hesitation that is just your nervous system being unfamiliar with new territory. Understanding this difference is critical. Productive doubt is doubt that is based on real information about real risks that are specific to your situation. Productive doubt says things like, "I want to quit my job and start a business, but I have 3 children and no savings, and I genuinely do not know how I will pay my mortgage." Productive doubt says, "I want to change careers, but I have explored this field a bit, and I have learned that it requires a certification that takes 2 years and costs significant money." Productive doubt is doubt that is based on actual circumstances and real obstacles that you have verified to exist. Destructive doubt, on the other hand, is doubt that is based on vague fears and hypothetical worst-case scenarios and generic anxiety about the unknown. Destructive doubt says things like, "What if people judge me?" Or, "What if I fail?" Or, "What if I am not good enough?" These doubts are not based on specific information. They are based on the fear catalog that your brain generates whenever you contemplate doing something new. These doubts are generated by your survival brain, which evolved in an environment where new experiences were actually dangerous, but they do not necessarily apply to your actual circumstances in the modern world. The technique that helps you move past destructive doubt is called cataloging versus solving, and it is remarkably simple to implement once you understand the principle. The idea is this: you allow yourself to write down or mentally catalog every single doubt that you have about your goal or project or decision. You do not try to resolve these doubts. You do not try to answer all of your questions. You do not try to eliminate the uncertainty. You simply acknowledge all of the doubt that exists, and then you choose to act anyway, despite the doubt. This is fundamentally different from trying to solve all of your doubts before you begin. When you attempt to solve all of your doubts beforehand, you are engaging in what psychologists call reassurance seeking. And research shows that reassurance seeking actually makes anxiety worse, not better. Every time you find an answer to one of your questions, your brain generates 3 new questions. Every time you resolve one doubt, your brain discovers 2 more doubts that you had not even thought of yet. This is an infinite loop that never ends, and it is designed by your nervous system to keep you safe by keeping you frozen. But when you simply catalog your doubts without trying to solve them, something interesting happens psychologically. The doubt loses some of its power. It becomes less overwhelming when it is no longer demanding to be resolved. You can acknowledge that the doubt exists. Yes, I am uncertain about how this will turn out. Yes, I have questions about whether I am capable of this. Yes, I do not know what will happen. And then you can act anyway, despite all of that doubt existing. This is the practice that separates people who move forward in their lives from people who remain stuck. This is the behavior that Seth Godin exhibited when he started his blog, without resolving all of his questions about whether blogging would ever work as a platform. This is the choice that you need to make if you want to stop waiting for certainty that will never arrive. Your assignment for today is this. You are going to write down every single doubt that you have about the goal or decision or project that you have been considering. You are going to catalog all of them. You are going to be completely honest about your fears and uncertainties and worst-case scenarios. And then you are going to look at that list and you're going to ask yourself a simple question. How many of these doubts are based on specific information about my actual circumstances? And how many are just my brain being afraid of something new? Most of the time, you will discover that the vast majority of your doubts are simply fear of the unknown, not predictions based on actual circumstances. Once you make that distinction, you have the power to move forward despite the doubt. You can act with the doubt still present. You can proceed with your questions still unanswered. You can take the first step toward your goal, while uncertainty is still swirling around in your mind. Because you now understand that uncertainty is normal and expected, and not actually a sign that you should stop. Chapter 3. The Paradox of Readiness. There is a moment that arrives in the life of almost every person over 40 when they wake up and realize with uncomfortable clarity that they are not who they thought they would be at this age. They do not feel like a fully formed adult with certainty about their place in the world. They do not feel ready for the role they are supposed to be playing. They look around at their life, the career, the relationships, the choices they have made, and they feel a strange disconnection between their external circumstances and their internal sense of identity. This moment arrives, and most people interpret it as a sign that they are somehow broken or deficient or behind where they should be. Sheryl Sandberg was already the chief of staff to the Treasury Secretary under President Clinton when she felt this sensation of not being ready. She was already a successful executive at Google when she did not feel ready. When she was offered the position of Chief Operating Officer at Facebook, one of the most powerful positions in the technology industry, she did not feel ready. On the surface, this did not make logical sense. Sheryl had already proven herself capable. She had already achieved at the highest levels. She had already demonstrated that she could handle responsibility and lead large organizations. Yet despite all of this evidence, she still felt the persistent sensation that she was not quite ready. What Sheryl discovered, and what neuroscience has now confirmed, is that this feeling of unreadiness does not actually disappear when you achieve more success. The feeling does not go away when you accumulate more qualifications or experience or accomplishments. The feeling actually intensifies as you move into new roles and new levels of responsibility, because each new level requires you to step into an identity that is unfamiliar to you. Each promotion, each new challenge, each expansion into a bigger role means that you are leaving behind an identity that felt comfortable and stepping into an identity that feels slightly foreign and uncertain. This is what psychologists call identity transition, and it is completely normal and universal and happens to almost every successful person. When you move from being an individual contributor to being a manager, you are not just changing your job, you are changing your identity. When you move from being an employee to being a business owner, you are not just changing your circumstances, you are changing your sense of self. When you move from being single to being in a committed relationship, or from being childless to being a parent, you are undergoing a fundamental shift in how you understand yourself and your role in the world. During these identity transitions, readiness feels impossible to achieve. Your nervous system has not yet developed a felt sense of belonging in this new identity. You do not have automatic competence in the new role because you have not been doing it long enough for it to become automatic. You do not have the accumulated wisdom and experience that comes from years of operating in this new role. So your brain generates a persistent sensation that you are not quite ready yet. that you should wait a bit longer until you feel more at home in this new identity. But here is the critical insight that changes everything about how you navigate these transitions. Readiness is not a feeling that arrives when you are actually ready. Readiness is a decision that you make to proceed despite not feeling ready. Readiness is not evidence that you are prepared. Readiness is a choice. Readiness is an action you take rather than a state you achieve. This is fundamentally different from how most people think about readiness, and this difference is precisely why most people remain stuck in cycles of waiting. Most people believe that readiness is something that will happen to them. They believe that at some point in the future, they will wake up and feel completely prepared and confident and certain about the decision they need to make. They believe that this feeling will arrive like a gift from outside themselves, and then they will finally be able to take action. But the truth is far more empowering and far more difficult at the same time. The truth is that readiness comes from the inside, and it is generated through the act of proceeding despite not feeling ready. Readiness is not a precondition for action. Readiness is a consequence of action. When you move into a new identity before you feel ready, your nervous system gradually adjusts to the new role. Your brain accumulates data about what it is like to operate in this new identity. Gradually, over weeks and months, the feeling of foreignness decreases and the feeling of belonging increases. This is not because you have become a different person or because you have somehow become magically more capable. This is because you have given your brain time and experience to adjust to the new reality. Sheryl Sandberg did not suddenly become ready to be chief operating officer at Facebook. What happened instead is that she made the decision to take the role despite not feeling ready. And then her brain spent the next months and years adjusting to this new identity. She did the job despite doubting whether she was capable of doing it. She led people despite not feeling like a true leader. She made decisions despite not feeling certain about those decisions. And over time, through the accumulation of experience, she developed a genuine sense of competence in the role. This is the paradox of readiness that nobody talks about openly. The people who are willing to proceed despite not feeling ready are the people who eventually feel most ready. The people who wait until they feel ready never actually move forward, because readiness never arrives. The window for action closes. The opportunity passes. The moment passes into history, and they are left with the regret of having waited for a feeling that would have only come through the act of proceeding. Think about a time in your past when you did something before you felt ready. Maybe you took a job before you felt completely prepared for it. Maybe you started a relationship before you felt certain about whether it would work out. Maybe you moved to a new city or started a new project or ended something that was no longer serving you. In that moment, you did not feel ready. You felt uncertain and nervous, and perhaps even terrified. But you did it anyway. And what happened? You adapted. Your brain adjusted. Over time, what had felt unfamiliar became familiar. What had felt risky became manageable. What had generated doubt eventually generated confidence. This is the mechanism that is available to you right now in whatever situation you are facing. You do not need to wait for readiness to arrive. You do not need to accumulate more qualifications or more experience or more certainty. What you need to do is make a decision to proceed despite not feeling ready, and then trust that readiness will develop through the act of proceeding. The technique that helps you make this transition is called the readiness paradox formula, and it is simple to state but profound in its implications. The formula is this: your feeling of unreadiness is not a prediction of future failure. Your feeling of unreadiness is evidence that you are growing. Your feeling of unreadiness is a sign that you are about to step into a bigger version of yourself. When you feel most unprepared is precisely when you are most ready to move forward, because that feeling of unpreparedness means you are about to expand your identity and your capabilities in a new direction. This reframes the entire experience. Instead of interpreting your doubt as a sign to stop, you interpret your doubt as a sign that growth is about to happen. Instead of waiting for the doubt to disappear, you recognize that the doubt will only disappear through the act of proceeding. Instead of treating unreadiness as a barrier to action, you treat unreadiness as a green light that you are about to do something genuinely new and challenging. Here is the practice that will shift your relationship with readiness. I want you to think of 3 specific times in your past when you took action before you felt ready. Think of times when you were uncertain and nervous and full of doubt, but you proceeded anyway. Write down or recall what actually happened in each of those situations. Did the worst-case scenario that you imagined actually come to pass? Were you actually incapable of handling what happened? Or did you surprise yourself with your own capacity and adaptability? In most cases, you will discover that you were more capable than you believed you were before you started. You will discover that you handled the situation better than you expected you would. You will discover that the doubt you felt beforehand did not accurately predict your actual performance or the actual outcome. This is the evidence you need to trust right now in your current situation. This is the proof that you are more capable than you believe you are. This is the data that tells you that proceeding despite not feeling ready is the right choice. Chapter 4. How your brain blocks motivation. To understand why you do not feel ready, why motivation eludes you, why certainty never quite arrives no matter how much you prepare. You need to understand the actual architecture of your brain and how it evolved over millions of years to do exactly what it is doing to you right now. Your brain is not broken. Your motivation is not deficient. Your readiness is not absent because of some personal failing or character flaw. Your brain is simply doing what it was brilliantly designed to do, which is to keep you alive in a world that your ancient ancestors perceived as fundamentally dangerous and unpredictable. Your survival brain is centered around a small almond-shaped structure located deep inside your skull called the amygdala. This structure is older than language, older than conscious thought, older than almost any other functioning part of your brain. The amygdala is your threat detection system, your internal alarm bell, your ancient security guard that evolved specifically to notice danger and mobilize your body to respond to that danger as quickly as possible. When your amygdala detects a threat, whether that threat is real or imagined or completely constructed by your anxious mind, it triggers what neuroscientists call an amygdala hijack. During an amygdala hijack, your brain downregulates the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain responsible for rational thinking and planning and complex decision-making. The prefrontal cortex is where you live most of the time when you are safe and calm and thinking clearly about your goals and your future. But when your amygdala perceives danger, it essentially tells your prefrontal cortex to shut down, because in a true survival situation, you do not have time to think rationally. You do not have time to weigh pros and cons. You do not have time to consider all of your options. You have time to run or fight or freeze, and that is all. This hijacking response was perfectly designed for the environment in which your ancient ancestors evolved. If you saw a predator on the horizon, you needed to mobilize your body to respond immediately. You needed to abandon complex thought and shift into pure reaction mode. You needed your amygdala to sound the alarm and your body to respond. This system kept your ancestors alive, when survival was genuinely uncertain and genuinely dangerous. But here is the problem in your modern life. Your amygdala cannot tell the difference between a real threat and an imagined threat. Your amygdala cannot distinguish between a predator that is actually going to kill you and the possibility of social embarrassment or financial loss or failure or judgment from people you care about. When you contemplate taking action on your goal, when you think about starting that business or making that career change or having that difficult conversation, your amygdala scans your environment for danger. It does not find a predator, but it does find uncertainty. It does not find a physical threat, but it does find the possibility of failure. And to your amygdala, both of these feel like danger that requires an immediate response. So your amygdala generates a cascade of neurochemicals designed to prepare your body for survival. It releases adrenaline, which makes your heart race and your hands shake, and your thoughts jump around frantically. It releases cortisol, which is a stress hormone that shuts down your digestive system and your reproductive system and your immune system. All non-essential functions when you are in survival mode. It mobilizes your nervous system to prepare you to either fight the threat, or run from it, or freeze in place. This entire response happens before your conscious mind even realizes what is going on. This is precisely why you cannot think clearly about your goal when you are in an anxious state. This is precisely why you cannot access your motivation or your creativity or your sense of possibility when your amygdala is activated. Your brain is not being unhelpful. Your brain is being helpful in exactly the way it was designed to be helpful. If you were actually facing a predator or a genuine survival threat. But you are not facing a predator. You are facing the possibility of growth and change and expansion into a bigger version of yourself. And your ancient brain perceives this as danger because it is unfamiliar. When you think about taking that first step toward your goal, that first step you identified in Chapter 1. What happens in your nervous system is that your amygdala perceives this as a potential threat. The uncertainty of the outcome activates your threat detection system. The unfamiliarity of what you are about to do triggers your survival response. Your brain floods your body with stress hormones designed to prepare you to fight or flee or freeze. And suddenly, that 1 meter step that felt manageable a few moments ago now feels impossibly dangerous. Your motivation evaporates. Your certainty disappears. Your readiness vanishes. And you find yourself back in the familiar territory of waiting, telling yourself that you should gather more information first, or think about this a bit longer, or wait for a better time when you feel more prepared. This is the mechanism that keeps people stuck in cycles of procrastination and inaction for decades. This is the neurological trap that prevents intelligent, capable, motivated people from taking action on their goals. This is not a character flaw. This is not laziness or lack of discipline or insufficient motivation. This is your brain doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to protect you from perceived danger by immobilizing you and keeping you in familiar territory. But here is the empowering part of understanding this mechanism. If you understand how the hijack works, you can learn to regulate it. If you understand that your amygdala is being activated by unfamiliarity rather than by genuine danger, you can respond to that activation in a way that does not reinforce the threat response. If you understand that your survival brain needs evidence that this new action is safe, you can provide that evidence through deliberate, conscious techniques that retrain your nervous system. The technique that accomplishes this is called Soothe the Guardian. Because what you are really doing is providing your amygdala, your ancient guardian that has been keeping you alive, with evidence that this new action does not require the full-scale threat response. You are telling your guardian that it can stand down, that you are safe, that this unfamiliar action does not actually require your survival mechanisms to activate at full power. One of the most effective ways to accomplish this is through a specific breathing technique called the 4-7-8 breathing pattern, which has been scientifically validated to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, the system responsible for calm and safety and recovery. This technique works because it signals to your amygdala that you are safe. When your breathing is slow and deliberate and controlled, your amygdala receives data that the threat level is low. This is because one of the most fundamental ways your ancient brain assesses threat is by monitoring your breathing. If your breathing is rapid and shallow, your brain interprets this as evidence that a threat is present. If your breathing is slow and deep and rhythmic, your brain interprets this as evidence that you are safe. The 4-7-8 breathing technique works like this. You breathe in through your nose for a count of 4. You hold your breath for a count of 7. You exhale through your mouth for a count of 8. You repeat this cycle 4 to 5 times. The extended exhale is the key element because it activates your vagus nerve, which is the primary nerve of your parasympathetic nervous system. When your vagus nerve is activated, it tells your amygdala that it is safe to downregulate the threat response. It is safe to calm your heart rate. It is safe to restore blood flow to your prefrontal cortex. It is safe to return to rational, clear thinking. What you will notice when you practice this breathing technique is that after just 3 minutes of the 4-7-8 pattern, your anxiety will decrease noticeably. Your racing thoughts will slow down. Your heart rate will normalize. Your sense of threat will diminish. Your amygdala will receive the signal that it is safe to stand down from full-scale alert status. And suddenly, that 1-meter step toward your goal will feel manageable again. That action you were about to take will no longer feel impossibly dangerous. Your brain will have the clarity to assess whether this action is genuinely risky or whether it is simply unfamiliar. This is not magic. This is neuroscience. This is your parasympathetic nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do, which is to restore your body to a state of safety and equilibrium after a threat response has been activated. By deliberately activating your parasympathetic system through controlled breathing, you are essentially overriding the amygdala hijack. You are giving your brain new data about your actual safety in this moment. You are retraining your nervous system to understand that unfamiliarity does not equal danger. Here is your practice for today. I want you to identify one moment in the next 24 hours when you feel anxiety or resistance about taking action toward your goal. When you notice that sensation, when you feel your amygdala activating and your motivation draining away, I want you to pause whatever you are doing. I want you to find a quiet place where you can focus for just 3 minutes. And I want you to practice the 4-7-8 breathing pattern. Breathe in for 4 counts. Hold for 7 counts. Exhale for 8 counts. Repeat this 5 times. That is all. 3 minutes. Nothing more complicated than that. After you complete this breathing exercise, notice what has changed in your body and your mind. Notice whether the anxiety has decreased. Notice whether your thoughts have become clearer. Notice whether that action you were afraid to take suddenly feels less impossible. This is the evidence that your nervous system can be retrained. This is the proof that you have more control over your amygdala than you realized. This is the mechanism that, when practiced repeatedly, will fundamentally change your relationship with fear and uncertainty and the possibility of taking action despite not feeling ready. Chapter 5. Rewrite your narrative. There is a story that you have been telling yourself about who you are and what you are capable of for so long that you have forgotten it is a story. You have forgotten that it is something you created, something that was reinforced through years of repetition, something that you chose to believe because at some point it felt true. or because someone else told you it was true, and you accepted it as fact. This story has become so deeply embedded in your sense of self that you experience it not as a narrative, but as the absolute truth about your identity and your capabilities and your future. The story might sound like this: I am not the kind of person who starts businesses. Or, I am not someone who can speak in front of large groups. Or, I am not creative or talented enough to write a book. Or, I am not brave enough to make a major life change. Or, I am not smart enough to learn something completely new at this stage of my life. These stories feel true because they have been reinforced through years of evidence that you have gathered in their support. Every time you avoided taking action, you gathered evidence for the story. Every time you felt afraid, you gathered evidence for the story. Every time you listened to your doubts, you gathered evidence for the story. But here is what neuroscience reveals about these stories that most people never understand. They are not descriptions of your actual capabilities or your actual limitations. They are descriptions of your past behavior patterns and your past choices and the conclusions you drew from those patterns. They are not predictions of what you are capable of in the future. They are simply summaries of what you have done in the past. Brené Brown spent decades believing a story about herself. She believed the story that she was not good enough, that she needed to perfect everything before she shared it, that if she showed her vulnerable, imperfect self to the world, people would judge her and reject her and leave her behind. This story shaped her behavior for years. It made her work in isolation on her research. It made her reluctant to share her findings. It made her wait until everything was perfect and polished before she was willing to present her work to others. But then something shifted in Brené's life. She began to question the story. She began to ask herself whether this narrative about her being not good enough was actually true, or whether it was simply a pattern she had adopted based on early experiences and past fears. She began to recognize that the story was not a description of reality. It was a self-imposed limitation that she had been reinforcing through her own choices and behaviors. This recognition opened a doorway. Once Brené understood that her story was not immutable truth, but rather a narrative that she had the power to rewrite, everything changed. She began sharing her research and her vulnerability. She began putting her imperfect work into the world. She began acting as though she was already good enough, rather than waiting until she felt good enough. And as she acted according to this new narrative, her brain began gathering new evidence in support of the new story. She received responses from people who were moved by her vulnerable sharing. She discovered that imperfection actually connected with people more deeply than perfection ever had. She developed a body of work that transformed how millions of people think about vulnerability and courage and belonging. This is how neuroplasticity works in the context of your personal narrative. Your brain is constantly looking for evidence to support whatever story you are telling yourself about who you are. If you are telling yourself the story that you are not ready, your brain will find evidence to support this story. If you are telling yourself the story that you are not capable, your brain will interpret your experiences through a lens that supports this narrative. If you are telling yourself the story that you should wait, your brain will generate reasons and justifications for waiting. But if you deliberately change your story, if you consciously rewrite the narrative about who you are and what you are capable of, your brain will begin gathering evidence to support this new narrative instead. This is not positive thinking or wishful thinking or denial of reality. This is how your brain's confirmation bias actually works. Your brain does not search for objective truth. Your brain searches for evidence that confirms whatever hypothesis you have already accepted about yourself. So if you change the hypothesis, you change the evidence your brain gathers. The technique that allows you to do this is called 3 rewritings, and it works by helping you identify the story you have been telling yourself and then deliberately creating new stories that are equally true, but oriented toward possibility and capability rather than toward limitation and fear. Here is how the technique works. First, you identify the limiting story. You might write something like, "I am not ready to start my business because I do not know enough about marketing, and I have never managed employees, and I do not have enough startup capital." This is the story you have been telling yourself. This is the narrative that your brain has been gathering evidence to support. Next, you create the first rewriting of this story. And you do this by taking the exact same circumstances, but reframing them through a lens of capability and learning, rather than through a lens of limitation and fear. You might rewrite it like this: "I am ready to start learning how to build a business, and I will figure out marketing and employee management as I go, just like every other business owner has done. My initial capital constraints will force me to be creative and resourceful, which are exactly the qualities that successful entrepreneurs need." Notice that you have not denied the reality of your circumstances. You have not pretended that you know everything or that you have unlimited resources. What you have done is reframe the exact same reality through a different lens. In the first story, your lack of knowledge is evidence of your unreadiness. In the second story, your lack of knowledge is simply the starting point of a learning journey that every entrepreneur experiences. Then, you create the second rewriting, and this time, you go even further. You rewrite the story from the perspective of someone who has already accomplished what you want to accomplish. You write as though you are already the person you want to become. You might write something like this: "I started my business without all the knowledge I thought I needed. I learned marketing by doing it. I learned to manage people by managing them. I discovered that what I lacked in expertise, I made up for in determination and willingness to learn. Now, 5 years later, I cannot imagine having waited for the moment when I felt ready, because that moment never would have come." This third version of the story is powerful because it shifts you from the position of someone who is not yet ready into the position of someone who is already engaged in the journey. It helps your brain understand what it will feel like to have moved through this transition. It provides your nervous system with a narrative of success and capability that it can begin to align with. The third and final rewriting is the one where you own your readiness as a choice rather than as a feeling. You write something like, "I am ready to start, not because I feel completely prepared, but because I have decided that readiness is something I create through action, not something I wait for. I am ready to learn. I am ready to make mistakes. I am ready to adjust and adapt. I am ready to be a beginner in this new area of my life. I am ready because I have chosen readiness." This final rewriting is the one that actually aligns your narrative with the neurological truth about how change actually works. You are not waiting for a feeling to change. You are making a decision to proceed despite the feeling. And through the act of proceeding, you are creating the person and the identity and the readiness that you are claiming in this narrative. What you will notice when you practice these 3 rewritings is that your relationship with your goal begins to shift. The story that seemed immutable and absolute begins to reveal itself as something that you constructed and something that you have the power to reconstruct. The limiting beliefs that felt true begin to feel like choices. The narrative that felt like your identity begins to feel like a pattern you adopted and a pattern you can change. This does not happen overnight. This is not a one-time exercise that instantly transforms your entire life. But each time you practice these 3 rewritings, each time you consciously choose a new narrative about yourself and your capabilities, You are sending new signals to your brain. You are providing new instructions about what kind of evidence to gather. You are redirecting your confirmation bias toward possibility rather than toward limitation. And over time, through repetition, the new narrative begins to feel as true and as real as the old limiting narrative felt before. Here is your practice for today. I want you to identify one limiting belief that you have been carrying about yourself in relation to your goal or your decision or your desired change. Write down the story exactly as you have been telling it to yourself. Write down all of the reasons why you are not ready, all of the ways in which you are not capable, all of the evidence that you are not the kind of person who does this thing. Then, take a blank page and rewrite that story. Keep the facts the same, but change your interpretation of what those facts mean. Take that second version and rewrite it again, this time from the perspective of someone who has already accomplished what you want to accomplish. Then, write a final version where you claim your readiness as a choice. When you finish, you will have 4 versions of the same story: the limiting narrative, the resourceful reframing, the story of future success, and the narrative of chosen readiness. Read all 4 of these stories back to yourself. Notice how different they feel. Notice how the same facts can support completely different conclusions about who you are and what you are capable of. This is the power of rewriting your narrative. This is how you begin to change not just your thoughts, but your identity itself. Chapter 6. Why successful people feel like frauds. There is a phenomenon so widespread among high-achieving people that psychologists have given it a name: imposter syndrome. But the name is misleading because it suggests that what these people are experiencing is a temporary feeling, a psychological quirk that will eventually pass if they just accumulate enough success or validation or proof of their competence. The truth is far more nuanced and far more instructive than this simple explanation suggests. The truth is that imposter syndrome is not actually a syndrome at all. It is a normal and natural response to growth. And the people who experience it most intensely are often the people who are growing most rapidly. Maya Angelou was one of the most celebrated writers and poets of the 20th century. She wrote more than 30 books. She won a National Medal of Honor. She was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. She gave a poem at a presidential inauguration. She was a respected voice on issues of race, gender, and human dignity. And yet, throughout her entire life, she felt as though she was not really a writer at all. Throughout her entire career, she doubted whether she actually had anything important to say. Throughout her decades of accomplishment and recognition, she carried a persistent belief that she was fundamentally a fraud, that someday people would discover that she did not actually deserve the recognition she had received. This is the paradox that almost nobody talks about openly. The more successful you become, the more intense your experience of imposter syndrome often becomes. This seems completely illogical. It seems as though success and recognition and accomplishment should eventually convince you that you are capable and that you deserve your achievements. But this is not what actually happens in the minds of people who are genuinely growing and expanding and challenging themselves. The reason for this counterintuitive pattern is that every time you succeed at something, you are also stepping into a bigger version of yourself. You are taking on new responsibilities that feel unfamiliar. You are operating at a higher level of complexity that stretches your current capabilities. You are leaving behind an identity that felt comfortable and stepping into an identity that feels like a performance or a role that you are not quite sure you can sustain. This is growth, and growth always feels uncomfortable because it requires you to be a beginner again. When you were promoted to your first management position, you were no longer just a skilled individual contributor. You were now supposed to be a leader, and suddenly, all of your individual contributor competencies did not directly translate into leadership competence. You had to learn new skills. You had to operate with less direct control and more influence. You had to navigate interpersonal dynamics that you had never had to navigate before. In that moment, you felt like a fraud because you were comparing your internal experience, your sense of being a beginner in this new role, with your external reputation as a competent professional. The gap between your internal experience and your external reputation created the feeling that you were faking it. The same dynamic happened when you took on more responsibility in your work. The same dynamic happens every single time you move into a new level of challenge or achievement. You step into a bigger role. Your brain has to adapt to this new identity. During the adaptation period, you feel like you are performing rather than being. You feel like you are pretending to be someone more capable than you actually are. And this feeling is so convincing and so persistent that many people interpret it as evidence that they should not have taken on this bigger role in the first place. Many people interpret their imposter syndrome as proof that they have somehow made a mistake and that they should retreat back to a level of responsibility where they feel competent and comfortable. But here is what the research actually shows about imposter syndrome. It is not evidence of inadequacy. It is evidence of ambition and growth. It is a signal that you are operating at the edge of your current capabilities. It is proof that you are challenging yourself to grow into a bigger version of yourself. The people who never experience imposter syndrome are the people who never try to grow beyond their current competence level. The people who never feel like frauds are the people who stay within the boundaries of what they already know they can do. This reframe is critical because it transforms imposter syndrome from a sign of inadequacy into a sign of growth. It transforms the feeling of being a fraud from evidence that you have made a mistake into evidence that you are exactly where you need to be if you want to continue developing and expanding. It transforms the discomfort that you feel into useful information rather than into a reason to retreat. The mechanism behind this reframe is based on what researchers call the competence curve, or the learning curve. When you first start learning something new, you experience what is called the valley of despair. You are aware that there is a huge gap between what you know and what you need to know. You are aware that there are people who are far more competent than you in this domain. You are intensely conscious of everything you do not know. This creates the feeling of being a fraud because you have elevated awareness of your own inadequacy. But here is what happens next on the learning curve. As you continue to practice and gain experience, you gradually move out of the valley of despair. You begin to develop actual competence in the new domain. You begin to internalize the skills and knowledge. You begin to operate more automatically in this new area. And as you do this, your feeling of being a fraud gradually diminishes because your internal experience of competence begins to match your external reputation. The critical insight is that this transformation does not happen through waiting. This transformation does not happen through accumulating more qualifications or more credentials or more validation from external sources. This transformation happens through the simple act of continuing to show up and continuing to practice despite the feeling that you are a fraud. Every time you show up to that leadership role despite feeling like you do not belong there, your brain gathers data about what it is actually like to operate in that role. Every time you take action despite feeling like a fraud, you are providing your nervous system with evidence that the role is survivable, that you are capable of handling it, that the fraud feeling is not actually predictive of your ability to succeed. In the case of Maya Angelou, what happened over decades was not that she eventually became convinced she was a real writer. What happened is that she continued writing despite her conviction that she was a fraud. She continued showing up to the page. She continued creating work that she believed in. She continued taking on bigger projects and bigger responsibilities. And over time, through the accumulation of experience, she developed an actual body of evidence. Published books, recognition from her peers, impact on readers around the world, that contradicted her internal belief that she was a fraud. But she still carried the feeling even at the end of her life. Even after publishing dozens of books and winning numerous awards and becoming one of the most celebrated voices of her generation, she still sometimes felt like an imposter. This is the crucial part of the story that most people do not understand about imposter syndrome and about growth itself. The feeling does not necessarily go away. What changes is your relationship with the feeling. What changes is your interpretation of what the feeling means. What changes is your willingness to take action despite the feeling, rather than using the feeling as a reason to stop. The technique that helps you navigate imposter syndrome is called the evidence bank. And it works by deliberately gathering and storing evidence of your competence so that you have something concrete to reference when the imposter syndrome feeling is particularly strong. The technique is simple. You are going to write down or collect specific pieces of evidence that demonstrate your competence in your current role or in relation to your current goal. For example, if you are experiencing imposter syndrome about your new management position, you might gather evidence like this. I have successfully completed projects that required me to manage other people's work. I have received positive feedback from my team members about my leadership. I have made decisions that resulted in positive outcomes. I have handled difficult interpersonal situations without causing damage. I have grown revenue or improved processes under my management. I have been trusted with larger and larger responsibilities over time. These are not generic affirmations. These are specific, concrete pieces of evidence from your actual life that demonstrate that you are actually capable of doing what your role requires you to do. When you write these down and collect them in what you can call your evidence bank, you create a resource that you can reference whenever the imposter feeling becomes too intense. Instead of believing the feeling, instead of treating the feeling as if it is truth about your actual capabilities, you can reference your evidence and remind yourself that the feeling is not predictive of your actual competence. Here is your practice for today. I want you to write down 3 specific pieces of evidence that demonstrate your competence in relation to your goal or your current role or your desired identity. These should be concrete examples from your actual life, not generic statements about what you believe about yourself. Write things like, I completed a project that required X skill, and the outcome was Y. Or, someone gave me feedback that said Z, which indicates that I have developed competence in this area. Or, I handled a difficult situation by doing X, and the result was positive. When you finish writing these 3 pieces of evidence, read them back to yourself and notice what shifts internally. Notice whether the imposter feeling loses some of its power when you have concrete evidence to contradict it. This is the beginning of building your evidence bank. This is the process of gathering data that will support you during the moments when imposter syndrome is most intense and most convincing. Chapter 7. When doubt is wisdom, when doubt is fear. There is a critical distinction that most people never learn to make. A distinction that would save them years of regret and wasted time if they understood it clearly. This is the distinction between doubt that is actually wisdom, doubt that is based on real information about real risks that are specific to your situation, and doubt that is simply fear masquerading as wisdom. Most people treat all doubt as equivalent. Most people assume that if they feel uncertain about something, that uncertainty is meaningful and should be taken seriously as a signal to stop or to wait. But this assumption is dangerously wrong and keeps people paralyzed in situations where they should be moving forward. Michelle Obama grew up in a household where her parents instilled in her the importance of education and hard work and careful decision-making. She learned from her parents to think things through before taking action. She learned to consider the consequences of her choices. She learned to be thoughtful and deliberate. These were valuable lessons that served her well throughout her life. But they also created a tendency in her to second-guess herself, to wonder if she had thought things through enough, to question whether she was making the right choice. When Barack Obama asked her to marry him, Michelle experienced doubt. She questioned whether this was the right decision. She questioned whether she understood him well enough. She questioned whether she was making a choice that she would regret. But as she examined her doubt more carefully, she realized something critical. Her doubt was not based on anything he had done or said that suggested he was untrustworthy or unsuitable as a partner. Her doubt was not based on any real red flags or warning signs. Her doubt was based on the fact that marriage is a big decision with significant consequences, and her brain was doing what brains do when faced with big decisions. It was generating uncertainty and worst-case scenarios. Michelle realized that she could distinguish between her productive doubt, which would have been based on something like, "I have discovered that he has lied to me about something significant," or "He has shown me that he does not share my core values," and her unproductive doubt, which was simply the general anxiety that comes with making any big commitment. Once she made this distinction, she was able to move forward with confidence, not because she had eliminated the doubt, but because she had understood that the doubt was not actually warning her about real danger. This is a skill that you need to develop if you want to stop waiting for certainty that will never arrive. You need to learn to distinguish between doubt that is based on real information and doubt that is based on fear of the unknown. You need to develop what psychologists call discernment, the ability to distinguish between different types of doubt and to respond appropriately to each type. Here are 5 specific indicators that can help you distinguish between productive doubt and unproductive doubt. The first indicator is specificity. Productive doubt is specific. Productive doubt points to concrete things that you have observed or learned. Productive doubt says, "I want to start a business, but I have learned through research that the failure rate in this industry is 70%, and I have identified 3 specific ways that my inexperience could lead to failure." Unproductive doubt is vague. Unproductive doubt says, "What if I start a business and it fails?" The first version is based on research and specific information. The second version is based on a generic fear of a hypothetical outcome. The second indicator is evidence. Productive doubt is supported by evidence that you can point to and examine. Productive doubt says, "I want to take this job, but I have spoken to 3 people who have worked at this company, and they have all told me that the manager is hostile and creates a toxic work environment." Unproductive doubt is not supported by specific evidence. Unproductive doubt says, "I have a bad feeling about this job. I just do not think it is the right move." One is based on data. One is based on intuition or anxiety. The third indicator is time sensitivity. Productive doubt maintains its force over time. If you are genuinely uncertain about something because of real information you have gathered, that uncertainty will remain relatively constant. You will think about the concern, and it will still feel significant a week later and a month later. Unproductive doubt tends to fade over time, especially once you gather more information or become more familiar with the thing you were uncertain about. If you are worried about something and that worry decreases significantly once you learn more about it or once you become more familiar with the situation, that suggests your doubt was based on fear of the unknown rather than on real concern. The fourth indicator is actionability. Productive doubt points to something you can actually do something about. Productive doubt says, I want to move to a new city, but the job market there is weak. So I should spend 3 months developing additional skills that are in higher demand in that city before I make the move. This doubt points to a specific action you can take to address the concern. Unproductive doubt points to things that are generally outside your control. Unproductive doubt says, what if I move to a new city and I do not make friends? There is no specific action you can take that will guarantee you make friends, so this doubt does not point to anything actionable. The fifth indicator is consistency. Productive doubt is consistent with your core values and your past decision-making patterns. If you are someone who values financial security and stability, and you are experiencing doubt about leaving a stable job to start a risky venture, that doubt is likely based on something real about your values and your priorities. Unproductive doubt tends to contradict your values and your past behavior. If you are someone who has always been willing to take calculated risks, and you are suddenly experiencing intense doubt about a modest risk that is consistent with your past choices, the doubt is likely based on fear rather than on real concern. When you apply these 5 indicators to your doubt, you will usually discover that you can sort your doubt into 2 categories: doubt that deserves your serious consideration, and doubt that is simply your nervous system being afraid of something new and unfamiliar. Once you have made this distinction, you have the power to respond appropriately to each type of doubt, rather than treating all doubt as equivalent. But there is a technique that can help you move through even productive doubt once you have identified it and examined it. This technique is called the 72-hour test, and it works because it gives your nervous system time to adjust to new information while also preventing you from using doubt as an excuse for infinite deliberation. The 72-hour test works like this. When you experience doubt about something important, you do not immediately take action or make a final decision based on that doubt. Instead, you deliberately pause. You acknowledge the doubt. You examine it using the 5 indicators I just described. Then you set a specific timeline. You will revisit this doubt in 72 hours. You will give yourself 3 days to think about it, to gather more information if you can, to let your nervous system adjust to the uncertainty. What you will usually discover after 72 hours is that one of 2 things has happened. Either the doubt has clarified into something more specific and more concrete, in which case it is likely productive doubt that deserves your attention and action, or the doubt has faded somewhat and become less intense, in which case it is likely unproductive doubt that was based on fear of the unknown, rather than on real concern. If the doubt has clarified and become more specific, you can address it directly. If the doubt has faded, you can move forward despite the doubt, knowing that it is not actually warning you about real danger. The 72-hour test is not a replacement for careful decision-making. It is not an excuse to be careless or reckless about important choices. But it is a guardrail against the trap of infinite deliberation, the trap of using doubt as an excuse to wait forever for a certainty that will never arrive. It is a way to give yourself time to think, while also preventing yourself from getting stuck in analysis paralysis. Here is your practice for today. I want you to identify one doubt that you have about your goal or your decision or your desired change. I want you to examine this doubt using the 5 indicators I described. Ask yourself, is this doubt specific or vague? Is it supported by evidence or is it based on intuition and fear? Does it maintain its force over time or does it fade when you become more familiar with the situation? Does it point to something you can actually do something about? Is it consistent with your core values and your past decision-making patterns? Once you have examined your doubt through these 5 filters, I want you to make a conscious decision. Is this productive doubt that deserves your serious consideration and action? Or is this unproductive doubt that is based on fear of the unknown? If it is productive doubt, what specific action can you take to address it? If it is unproductive doubt, are you willing to move forward despite the doubt, knowing that it is not actually predictive of what will happen? This distinction will free you from the trap of infinite waiting and allow you to move forward with clarity and conviction. Chapter 8. The Power of Micro-Victories. There is a profound misunderstanding that shapes how most people approach their goals, and this misunderstanding keeps them stuck in cycles of motivation and demotivation that repeat endlessly without producing lasting change. This misunderstanding is about the size of the steps you need to take in order to create momentum. Most people believe that momentum comes from taking big action, from making dramatic changes, from committing to enormous goals that require them to overhaul their entire life at once. But neuroscience reveals something completely different and far more practical and far more actionable. Your brain does not generate motivation in response to massive goals. Your brain actually experiences massive goals as threats. When your brain contemplates a goal that feels enormous, I am going to write a book, or I am going to change my career, or I am going to lose 50 pounds. Your amygdala perceives the scale of this challenge and interprets it as a threat to your survival. Your brain activates the stress response. Your motivation decreases rather than increases. You feel paralyzed by the enormity of what you are contemplating, and so you retreat back into inaction. But your brain responds very differently to small, manageable goals. When your goal is small enough that your amygdala does not perceive it as a threat. What next? When your goal is something like write 500 words, or have one conversation with someone in my target industry, or go for a 20-minute walk, your brain does not activate the threat response. Your prefrontal cortex remains online. You can actually think clearly about the goal and take action toward it. And when you complete this small goal, your brain releases dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter associated with motivation and reward and pleasure. This is the critical mechanism that most people never understand. Motivation is not generated by the achievement itself. Motivation is generated by the neurochemical reward that your brain releases when you complete something successfully. And your brain is more likely to release this reward in response to completing small, achievable goals than in response to completing enormous goals that feel impossible. B.J. Fogg is a researcher at Stanford University who has spent the last 2 decades studying habit formation and behavior change. He discovered through his research that the most effective way to create lasting behavior change is not through willpower or discipline or massive goal setting. The most effective way is through what he calls tiny habits. Small, almost trivial actions that you commit to doing on a consistent basis. Fogg's research shows that when people commit to tiny habits, 2 things happen. First, they actually follow through on their commitment because the action is small enough that it does not feel overwhelming. Second, because they actually follow through, their brain releases dopamine and begins to associate this behavior with positive reward. Over time, as these tiny habits become automated and ingrained, something remarkable happens. The behavior expands naturally. Once you have established the tiny habit of writing 500 words every morning, you often find yourself writing more than 500 words because the resistance has been overcome and the dopamine reward is already flowing. Once you have established the tiny habit of going for a 15-minute walk, you often find yourself walking longer because you have already overcome the inertia of starting. Momentum builds not from taking giant leaps, but from the consistent accumulation of small wins. This is why most New Year's resolutions fail, by the way. Most people set enormous goals at the beginning of the year. They commit to going to the gym 5 times a week, or losing 50 pounds, or reading 50 books, or writing a novel. These goals feel inspiring and significant, but they are so enormous that most people cannot sustain them. They hit a bump in the road, they miss a workout, or they have a few weeks where they do not progress, and the entire structure collapses. They interpret their failure to maintain the enormous goal as evidence that they lack discipline or willpower or commitment, when the real problem was that the goal was too large to be sustainable. The technique that solves this problem is called the 1% ladder, and it works by taking whatever goal you have and breaking it down into such small increments that each individual step feels almost trivially easy. The principle behind the 1% ladder is that small, consistent progress compounds over time in the same way that compound interest works in finance. A 1% improvement might not feel significant on any given day, but over the course of weeks and months and years, 1% improvements compound into enormous changes. Here is how the 1% ladder works. Let's say your goal is to start a business. That is an enormous goal that feels overwhelming and that your amygdala perceives as a threat. So you break it down. Your 1% steps might look like this. First, spend 15 minutes researching what kind of business you want to start. That is step 1. Do not proceed to step 2 until you have completed step 1 and felt the small dopamine reward from completing this small task. Then, spend 15 minutes researching the market for this type of business. Then, spend 15 minutes outlining what your business model would look like. Then, spend 15 minutes drafting a business plan. Then, spend 15 minutes identifying potential customers. Then, spend 15 minutes researching what competitors exist in this space. Then, spend 15 minutes creating a simple financial projection. Notice that each individual step requires only 15 minutes. Notice that each step is small enough that your amygdala does not perceive it as a threat. Notice that each step is concrete and specific enough that you know exactly what you need to do. And notice that by the time you have completed all 7 or 8 of these steps, you have actually done enough work to understand whether this business idea is viable and whether you want to proceed further. You have not started the business yet, but you have moved from 0 to something. And that movement has been generated by the accumulation of small victories rather than by any single act of heroic effort. The beauty of the 1% ladder is that it removes the all-or-nothing thinking that keeps most people stuck. It removes the belief that you need to commit to the entire journey before you take even the first step. It removes the requirement that you feel ready for the entire project before you begin. Instead, it asks you only to commit to the next small step, and then the next small step after that, and then the next small step after that. Over time, these small steps accumulate into significant progress, and the dopamine rewards that you receive from completing each small step accumulate into genuine motivation. This is how lasting behavior change actually works. This is the mechanism that separates people who achieve their goals from people who remain stuck in cycles of motivation and demotivation. This is the practical, neurologically sound approach to creating the motivation that you thought you needed to wait for. What most people do not realize is that you are essentially rewiring your brain through this process. Every time you complete a small goal and receive a dopamine reward, you are strengthening the neural pathways associated with this behavior. Your brain is learning that this activity is worth doing. Your brain is building momentum and motivation through the accumulation of small wins rather than through waiting for some external spark of inspiration. Here is your practice for today. I want you to take your primary goal, the thing you have been waiting to feel ready for, and I want you to break it down into 10 specific 1% steps. Each step should be small enough that you can complete it in 5 to 15 minutes. Each step should be concrete and specific enough that you know exactly what you need to do. Each step should move you incrementally toward your goal without requiring you to commit to the entire journey. Write these 10 steps down. Look at the first step. Does it feel manageable? Does it feel like something you can actually do today without requiring extraordinary willpower or motivation? If the answer is yes, you have found your entry point. If the answer is no, make the step even smaller. Break it down further. Your goal is to create a first step that feels so small and so manageable that the only reason you would not do it is if you actively chose not to do it, not because you felt afraid or uncertain or unprepared. Chapter 9. Your environment is sabotaging you. The most underestimated force that shapes whether you take action on your goals is not your willpower and not your discipline and not your motivation. The most underestimated force is your environment. The people around you, the conversations you have, the social signals you receive about what is possible and what is acceptable and what is safe. Your environment is either supporting your growth or it is silently sabotaging it. And most people never even notice this happening because the sabotage is so quiet and so normalized that it feels like genuine wisdom rather than fear, masquerading as concern. When you talk about your goal or your decision or your desired change to the people around you, you are usually met with a certain kind of response. The response takes many forms, but it generally sounds like this. That is interesting. But let us think about this a bit more. What if this does not work out? Have you considered what could go wrong? Maybe you should wait until you have saved more money, or until the market conditions are better, or until you have more experience. These responses sound like wisdom. These responses sound like people who care about you, looking out for your best interests. But what is actually happening in these moments is far more subtle and far more destructive. Chris Sacca is a legendary venture capitalist who has invested in companies like Twitter, Instagram, and Uber. He is someone who has spent his entire career surrounded by people who take enormous risks and who bet their entire lives on ideas that most people think are crazy. But early in his career, before he developed these connections and before he surrounded himself with people who were comfortable with risk and uncertainty, Chris worked in an environment where risk was viewed with suspicion and where people regularly counseled caution and patience and waiting. Chris describes the moment when he realized that his environment was keeping him from taking the risks he needed to take in order to grow his career and achieve his goals. He was in conversation with colleagues who were perfectly intelligent and perfectly well-intentioned, but they were all coming from a place of fear. They were afraid of risk because they had been taught to be afraid of risk. They were afraid of failure because they had been taught that failure was shameful, and their fear was contagious. Every time Chris talked about an ambitious goal or a risky move, his colleagues would respond with warnings and caution. And over time, Chris internalized these warnings. He began to doubt his own instincts. He began to believe that his ambitions were unrealistic. He began to wait, just as his environment had taught him to wait. But what changed everything for Chris was when he deliberately shifted his environment. He moved to a place where he was surrounded by people who took risks regularly. He surrounded himself with people who viewed failure as a learning opportunity rather than as a shameful outcome. He surrounded himself with people who were comfortable with uncertainty and who proceeded despite not feeling ready. And what happened next is that Chris's entire sense of what was possible shifted. What had seemed impossible when he was surrounded by fearful voices suddenly seemed achievable when he was surrounded by courageous voices. This is the mechanism that operates beneath the surface of so many people's lives. And it is one of the most important mechanisms to understand if you want to move forward with your goals. Your environment is not neutral. Your environment is actively shaping your beliefs about what is possible and what is acceptable and what is worth the risk. The people around you are either feeding your doubts or they are feeding your courage. They are either reinforcing your limiting beliefs or they are challenging you to expand beyond them. The problem is particularly acute for people in their 40s and beyond, because by this point in your life, you have invested decades in your current relationships and your current social circles. You have built deep connections with people who know you as a certain kind of person, the kind of person who plays it safe, or the kind of person who waits for the right moment, or the kind of person who is risk-averse. Your social circle has a vested interest in you remaining the same, because if you change, the entire dynamic of the relationships changes. If you become someone who takes risks and who pursues ambitious goals, the people around you who are more cautious might feel threatened or challenged or called out for their own lack of action. So what happens is that people in their 40s and beyond often find themselves in a situation where the people closest to them are subtly or not so subtly discouraging them from taking the very actions that would lead to growth and positive change. And because these people are close to us, because we love them and respect them, their discouragement carries enormous weight. Their warnings feel legitimate. Their caution feels like genuine wisdom rather than fear. The technique that helps you navigate this dynamic is called environment filtering, and it works by helping you distinguish between people who are genuinely concerned about your well-being and people who are projecting their own fears onto your situation. Environment filtering also helps you identify the people in your life who are supportive of growth and who can be trusted to encourage you when you are feeling afraid or uncertain. Here is how environment filtering works. You are going to create a simple list of the people you regularly interact with and talk to about your goals and your life. For each person, you are going to ask yourself a series of questions. First, when I talk to this person about my goals, do they generally respond with encouragement and curiosity, or do they respond with warnings and caution? Second, does this person have experience taking risks similar to the ones I am considering taking? Or are they coming from a place of fear about something they have never actually done? Third, when I am feeling afraid or uncertain, does this person help me access my courage and my clarity? Or do they validate and amplify my fears? Fourth, does this person have their own ambitious goals that they are pursuing? Or do they seem to have given up on growth and change in their own life? Once you have asked yourself these questions about the people in your life, you will likely discover that you can sort them into a few categories. There are people who are genuinely supportive and who feed your courage and your possibility. These are people who are worth sharing your goals with and who are worth seeking out when you need encouragement. There are people who are well-intentioned but who come from a place of fear. And with these people, it might be wise to be selective about which goals you discuss. And there are people who actively undermine your sense of possibility. And with these people, it might be necessary to create some distance. This is not about being unkind to people who are important to you. This is about recognizing that different people have different relationships with risk and growth and change. Some people are ready to support you in your expansion. Some people are not. And you have the right to choose which people you share your vulnerable goals with and which people you might want to keep at arm's length while you are in the process of building your courage and your conviction. The critical insight is that you do not need to change all of your relationships or abandon the people you love. What you need to do is become more intentional about which people you turn to for support and encouragement around your goals. You need to actively seek out people who have done the things you want to do or who are actively pursuing ambitious goals themselves. You need to create or join communities of people who are comfortable with risk and uncertainty and growth. And here is something important. As you take action toward your goals and as you begin to expand into a bigger version of yourself, you will naturally attract different people into your life. You will naturally become closer to people who are on a similar growth trajectory. The people who are holding you back through their fear-based responses will naturally fall away, not because you were unkind to them, but because you simply have less in common anymore. This is the natural process of evolution that happens when you decide to grow. Here is your practice for today. I want you to make a list of the 3 people you interact with most regularly. People you talk to about your goals and your life and your fears. For each person, I want you to write down whether they generally feed your courage or whether they generally amplify your fears. I want you to be honest about this. You do not need to share this assessment with anyone. This is just for you to understand your current environment. Then, I want you to identify one person, either someone currently in your life or someone you could actively seek out, who has done something similar to what you want to do or who is actively pursuing ambitious goals. This is someone who is comfortable with risk and uncertainty. This is someone who has not given up on growth and change. Commit to having a conversation with this person in the next week. Ask them about their journey. Ask them about how they overcame their doubts. Ask them about what they wish they had known before they started. This conversation will provide you with evidence that what you want to do is possible, and it will help you recalibrate your sense of what is achievable. Chapter 10. The pain of action versus the pain of inaction. There is a choice that you are going to make. Whether you make it consciously or whether you make it unconsciously through your continued inaction. This choice exists at the deepest level of human psychology, and it is the choice between 2 different kinds of pain. On one side, there is the pain of taking action toward your goal, the pain of stepping into uncertainty, the pain of risking failure, the pain of being a beginner, the pain of being judged or criticized or rejected. On the other side, there is the pain of not taking action, the pain of regret, the pain of wondering what might have been, the pain of watching your life pass and realizing that you spent it waiting for a readiness that never came. Most people make this choice by default rather than by conscious deliberation. Most people choose the pain of inaction because it is the familiar pain, the pain they have learned to live with, the pain that does not require them to risk anything new. But there is a particular cruelty to this choice when you are in your 40s or beyond. Because this is when the mathematics of life begin to shift in a way that makes the pain of inaction suddenly and dramatically more intense than the pain of action. Research on regret conducted by psychologists reveals something that most people do not understand about how regret actually operates in the human psyche. People tend to believe that the regrets they will experience are regrets about the things they tried and that failed. People tend to assume that they will spend their later years wishing they had not taken that risk, or made that mistake, or pursued that dream that did not work out. But the research actually shows something very different. The most common regrets that people experience in their later years are not regrets about the things they tried. The most common regrets are about the things they did not try. People in their 60s and 70s and beyond consistently report that they wish they had taken more risks when they were younger. They wish they had pursued their dreams when they still had time. They wish they had not waited for the perfect moment, because the perfect moment never came, and now it is too late. The pain of inaction. the pain of never knowing what might have been, turns out to be far more enduring and far more damaging than the pain of action. This is the insight that changes everything when you are in your 40s and beyond. This is the realization that should move you from contemplation into action. The mathematics of your life have shifted. You have already lived a significant portion of your life. You can no longer assume that you have unlimited time to delay your goals and pursue them later. You can no longer operate as though there will always be another chance or another opportunity or another moment when you will feel more ready. The technique that helps you access this insight is called the letter from your future self, and it works by asking you to imagine yourself at an advanced age, let us say 70 or 80 years old, and to imagine that you did not pursue your goal, that you did not take action, that you chose the pain of inaction instead of the pain of action. What would that future version of you wish you had known? What would that future version of you want to tell your current self? This is not a cheerful exercise. This is a confrontation with the reality of mortality and choice and the passage of time. But it is a confrontation that has the power to shift you from waiting into action, because it forces you to viscerally experience the long-term consequences of your choice to delay. When you write this letter from your future self, you are not writing a fantasy or an affirmation. You are not writing about the best-case scenario where everything works out perfectly. You are writing about the realistic consequences of choosing not to pursue your goal. You might write something like this: I am 80 years old now, and I am writing to tell you that I have spent the last 30 years wondering what might have happened if I had started my business when I was 50. I have spent decades imagining the life I could have built, the income I could have generated, the impact I could have had. Instead, I stayed in my job. I played it safe, and I accumulated a comfortable but ultimately unsatisfying life. I wish I had been brave enough to try. I wish I had been willing to fail. Now it is too late, and I have to live with that regret for whatever years I have left. This is not a pleasant letter to write. This is not a comfortable exercise. But this is precisely why it is so powerful. This letter forces you to confront the real consequences of your choice to wait. This letter makes visceral the difference between the temporary pain of taking action and the permanent pain of not taking action. There is another version of this letter that you can write, and this one is the version where you write from the perspective of your future self who did take action, who did pursue the goal despite not feeling ready. In this version, you write about what that experience was like. You write about the failures you experienced and how you survived them. You write about the unexpected benefits and opportunities that emerged as a result of taking action. You write about the self-respect and self-knowledge that came from being willing to risk. You write about the relief of knowing that you at least tried, that you at least had the courage to pursue what mattered to you. When you have both of these letters in front of you, the letter from the version of yourself who did not act and the letter from the version of yourself who did act, you have a concrete representation of the choice that you are making right now. You have a visceral sense of what the long-term consequences of your choice will be. And suddenly, the pain of action seems far less significant than it did before. Suddenly, the temporary discomfort of stepping into uncertainty seems like a small price to pay in order to avoid decades of regret. This is not motivation based on fear. This is not the use of scare tactics to force you into action. This is simply a realistic assessment of the actual mathematical consequences of your choices given your particular life circumstances. You are in your 40s or beyond. You have already spent decades of your life. The window of opportunity for pursuing certain goals is not infinite. You do not have forever to decide whether to take action. At some point, the window closes. At some point, the opportunity passes. At some point, you are too old, or too tired, or too far removed from your goal to pursue it anymore. This is not meant to be depressing. This is meant to be liberating. This is meant to move you from the abstract realm of contemplation into the concrete realm of choice. This is meant to help you understand that the pain you feel when you contemplate taking action is not actually as significant as the pain you will feel if you do not take action. The pain of action is temporary. The pain of inaction is permanent. Here is your practice for today. I want you to write 2 letters. The first letter is written from the perspective of your 80-year-old self who did not pursue your goal. Write about the regrets. Write about what you wish you had done differently. Write about the decades you spent wondering what might have been. Do not soften this. Do not make it easier. Write the painful truth of what it would feel like to reach the end of your life and realize that you never took the action you wanted to take. Then, write a second letter from the perspective of your 80-year-old self who did pursue your goal. Write about the challenges you faced. Write about the failures you experienced and how you moved through them. Write about the growth and the learning and the unexpected opportunities that emerged. Write about how you felt knowing that you at least tried. Write about the self-respect that came from being willing to risk. When you have written both letters, read them both back to yourself. Sit with the emotional reality of what each letter represents. Let yourself feel the weight of the choice that you are making right now. This is the most powerful motivator that exists. Not willpower, not discipline, not even enthusiasm, but rather a clear-eyed understanding of the actual consequences of your choice. Chapter 11. The first step. Not tomorrow, today. Everything that you have read in the chapters before this one has been building toward this single moment. Everything, the understanding of how your brain generates doubt, the recognition that motivation comes after action rather than before it, the distinction between productive and unproductive doubt, the discovery that small steps generate momentum. All of it has been preparation for what you are about to do in the next few minutes. This is not a book designed to be read and then set aside. This is not a book designed to inspire you for a moment and then have you return to your previous patterns of behavior. This book is designed to move you from contemplation into action, from waiting into doing, from the abstract realm of goals into the concrete realm of specific choices. Reid Hoffman is the founder of LinkedIn, one of the most significant professional networks in the world. When Reid conceived of the idea for LinkedIn, he did not have all of the answers. He did not have a complete business model. He did not have a guaranteed path to success. In fact, most of the people he talked to about the idea told him it would not work. They told him that the market was too competitive, that the timing was wrong, that he should wait for better conditions. They told him all of the reasons why he should wait. But Reid understood something critical about action and about creation and about building something that matters. Reid understood that you do not achieve significant things by waiting for perfect conditions or perfect knowledge or perfect certainty. Reid understood that significant achievements come from taking action despite uncertainty, from learning through the process of doing rather than through endless planning, from being willing to stumble and adjust and learn as you go. So Reid took action. He launched LinkedIn while it was still imperfect. He refined the product based on what he learned from actual users rather than from his own imagination. He adapted his business model as he discovered what actually worked in the marketplace. This is how creation actually works. This is how meaningful change actually happens. It does not happen through perfect planning. It does not happen through waiting for ideal conditions. It happens through taking imperfect action and then learning and adjusting based on the results of that action. It happens through being willing to launch before you are ready, to share your work before it is perfect, to take the risk of being seen as inadequate or unprepared because you understand that the alternative, waiting for perfect readiness, is actually far more risky. The reason that most people do not achieve their goals is not because they lack capability or intelligence or resources. The reason most people do not achieve their goals is because they are waiting. They are waiting for more information. They are waiting to feel more ready. They are waiting for better circumstances. They are waiting for the doubts to go away. They are waiting, and while they are waiting, time passes. Years pass. Decades pass. And suddenly they are not 40 anymore. They are 50 or 60 or 70. And the realization hits them that they will never pursue the goal they have been waiting to pursue. The window has closed. But you do not have to be that person. You do not have to spend the next decade or decade waiting for a feeling that will never arrive. You do not have to reach the end of your life with the regret of all the things you did not try. You have the information you need right now. You have the understanding you need right now. You have everything you need to take the first step right now. The only thing standing between you and your goal is the willingness to proceed despite not feeling ready. The mechanism that makes this possible is remarkably simple. And it is something that you can activate right now, in this very moment, before you finish listening to this chapter. The mechanism is the decision to take one small action today. Not tomorrow, not next week, not when you have more time or more information or more certainty. Today, right now, this moment. This is the practice that separates people who achieve their goals from people who talk about achieving their goals. This is the behavior that changes everything. This is what makes the difference between someone who reads a book like this and feels inspired for a moment and then returns to their previous patterns, and someone who reads a book like this and actually changes their life. Here is what you are going to do. Before you do anything else, before you close this audio or finish reading this chapter, I want you to commit to one specific action that you will take in the next 24 hours. This action should be your 1-meter action from Chapter 1. This action should be small enough that it feels manageable. This action should be concrete enough that you know exactly what you need to do. This action should be something that you can do today or tomorrow, not something that requires extensive planning or extensive preparation. You might commit to spending 30 minutes researching something related to your goal. You might commit to writing down 3 specific ideas related to your goal. You might commit to having one conversation with someone about your goal. You might commit to taking one small step that moves you in the direction of your goal. Whatever you choose, make it specific. Make it small. Make it something that you are genuinely going to do, not something that you hope to do if circumstances align and you happen to feel motivated. Write this commitment down, or speak it out loud, or send it to someone who will hold you accountable. Do something that makes this commitment real and visible, rather than leaving it as an abstract intention in your mind. The act of making the commitment public or visible increases exponentially the likelihood that you will follow through on it. The act of telling someone else what you are going to do creates accountability that your internal motivation alone might not provide. And then, when you have made this commitment, I want you to actually do it. I want you to do it regardless of how you feel. I want you to do it even if you wake up tomorrow and you feel uncertain or afraid or full of doubt about whether this is the right decision. I want you to do it because you have made a commitment and because you understand that action precedes motivation, not the other way around. I want you to do it because you understand that this one small action will trigger a cascade of neurological changes that will begin to shift your entire experience of possibility and capability. What will happen when you take this action is that your brain will receive data that contradicts your previous belief that you should wait. Your brain will receive evidence that this goal is actually achievable, that you are actually capable of taking steps toward it, that the feeling of being unprepared is not actually predictive of your ability to succeed. Your amygdala will begin to relax. Your prefrontal cortex will come back online. Your motivation will begin to increase because you will have given your brain the experience it needs in order to generate motivation. And then, once you have taken this first step, the next step will seem slightly less impossible. Once you have taken 2 steps, the third step will seem slightly more achievable. This is how momentum builds. This is how significant change happens. This is how you move from being someone who talks about their goals into being someone who actually pursues their goals. The path forward is not mysterious. The path forward is not complicated. The path forward is simply this. Acknowledge that you will never feel completely ready. Acknowledge that doubt is going to persist regardless of how much planning you do. Acknowledge that the only path forward is through action, despite your fear, and despite your doubt, and despite your sense that you should wait just a bit longer. And then take that one small step today. Not tomorrow. Today. This moment. Right now. Your goal is waiting for you. Your bigger, better version of yourself is waiting for you. Your future self, the one who took action despite not feeling ready, is waiting to tell you that it was worth it. That the temporary pain of action was far less significant than the permanent pain of inaction would have been. That you are far more capable than you believed you were when you started. That future self is waiting. And the only thing standing between your current self and that future self is the willingness to take one small step today. What will you do? What is your 1 meter? What is the small, manageable action that you will take in the next 24 hours that moves you in the direction of your goal? Do not overthink this. Do not wait for the perfect answer. Do not deliberate endlessly about what the right action should be. Choose one small action, commit to it, and then do it. This is how you begin. This is how you transform your life from a series of waiting and postponement into a series of small victories that compound into significant change. The readiness you have been waiting for does not exist outside of you. It exists within you, and it is activated the moment you decide to proceed despite your doubt. It is created through action, not through waiting. It is built through the accumulation of small wins, not through the achievement of enormous goals. It is something that you generate through your choices and your commitment and your willingness to be a beginner again. You have everything you need. You have all the information. You have all the understanding. You have all the capacity. The only thing you lack is the willingness to stop waiting and to start doing. And that willingness is something that you can access right now, in this moment, before you take another step. That willingness is available to you if you choose it. That willingness is yours if you claim it. So what will it be? Will you continue waiting? Or will you take that first step today?